Hi everybody, I'm back during our little heat wave. This is the 12th of June. It's so hot that they even installed a fan on the debt ceiling. That seems appropriate for a finance course. We were talking about bond terms and characteristics. We defined the par value of a bond, which usually is $1,000. We will assume that is the case throughout this course. We talked about the face interest rate, or the coupon rate, which is the fixed interest rate. And by the way, sometimes bonds have interest rates that are not fixed. We're going to assume that they are fixed in this course. Okay, so when you buy an 8% bond, like a Sterling example, that bond is going to pay you 8% every single year. One $1,000 bond means you will get a check for interest of $80 every year. Okay. By the way, bonds usually do pay interest twice a year. I'm going to ignore that. Okay. Now, bonds have a date of maturity as well. Please keep that in mind. This is on pages 102 and 103. So, bonds, with some rare exceptions, have a fixed maturity date. Now, believe it or not, friends, that means that it's that much easier to come up with the value of a bond today. Why is that? Because, as I said in my last lecture, the value of any financial instrument is the present value of future cash flows, and since bonds mature on a given date, it's easy to discount them. I'll go through that with you later, okay? So the maturity date, okay? A bond has a par value, $1,000. It has a face or a coupon interest rate. In my example, that's 8%. It could be anywhere. It could be 10, 11, 12. It could be 3, 4, 5, okay? In my example, I made it 8, okay? And it has a maturity date, usually, okay? We will assume it always does here in my class. Now, the people who write bonds, who invent bonds, who put the terms together, use various means to sweeten the pot for either the bond issuer, if they're in the position of power, or the bond buyer, if they're in the position of power. Remember, everything is negotiable, and sometimes the bond issuer is in the position of strength. Sometimes it is the bond buyer. Okay, so two of the ones that I'll hold you responsible for are conversion and callability. The first one is conversion. A bond could be convertible. That means that you, the holder, once you buy the bond, you give me your money, I'm the company, I issue a bond to you. Now you, the holder, you have an option to convert some or all of that bond into stock of the corporation. That gives you a nice little option, okay? Now, everything is quid pro quo in the world of business. Quid pro quo, a Latin phrase that means something for something, okay? That means if you give something up, you expect that you are going to get something in return. Now, let's assume for a moment that I'm your landlord, and you pay me $1,000 a month to rent an apartment from me, okay? Now, you like the building, you like my house, and you want to own it. So you say to me, Alan, if you ever decide as my landlord that you want to sell the house, give me first crack, okay? I want an option to buy. Sweet, I will be happy to do that, okay? I will give you the option, a right of first refusal to buy my house if I decide to sell it. Okay, I've just given something up. What will happen to your rent? Is that going to stay at $1,000? Probably not. Your rent's probably going to go up because you're buying that option from me. Okay, so whenever someone gains in a negotiation, you can expect they're going to have to give something up. Now, conversion, if a bond is convertible, convertible, that means you're getting a right. You're getting the ability to convert part of that bond into common stock in case it becomes attractive for you. Okay, you're getting something. That means that what else is going to have to cave? How about the interest rate, okay? I'm going to give you a certain interest rate on my bonds, but if you want a conversion option, well, you're going to have to cave a little on something. It's going to be the interest rate, all things equal, okay? So I will issue a bond to you, but if you want a conversion option, you're going to have to accept an interest rate that's less. You have to give something else, something up if you want some kind of a power, okay? All right. The second one I want you responsible for is a call option. Now, callability means I, the bond issuer, will have the right to call the bond from you before it matures. Okay, and that's very common. If you're a homeowner, you know that sometimes when interest rates are dropping, it's attractive to you to refinance. Okay, why should you pay a 5% fixed mortgage if rates are now at 4.5% or 4%? Okay, you will refinance. That's what a call option is. Okay, if I am paying you 7% on a bond, and all of a sudden rates drop and I could refinance at 4%, why should I keep paying you a higher rate? I want the right to call those bonds away from you. That's what callability is. Okay, so now, instead of you, the bond holder, having an advantage, I, the bond issuer, have an advantage. I have the right to call those bonds. You're going to make me pay for that. This time you're in the catbird seat. This time you're going to say, Alan, okay, you want to make those bonds callable? That will give you a power. You need to pay me more interest. So all things equal, if a bond is callable, it will pay a higher interest rate. Okay? Because I, the issuer, am reserving a right for myself. So please remember that. Conversion means you, the bondholder, have a power. You're going to have to give up interest rate. If the bond is callable, I, the issuer, have a power. That means I have to sweeten the deal for you with a higher interest rate. Okay? All right. And just compare callability to refinancing your home. Okay? All right. And this is all in the text. I focus you on page 103 and 104. Okay? Very good. A bond can be a serial bond that has nothing to do with Kellogg Company. Okay, a serial bond means like something serial, like a serial TV series, something that repeats. Okay, a serial bond means instead of the whole thing maturing at a given date, it might mature in baby steps, okay? So many of the bonds, let's say it's a $20 million bond issue, maybe 5 million of them mature in 2020, another 5 in 2022, another 5 million in the year 2024, okay? That's what a serial bond is. This is all on page 104. A sinking fund. You've heard the term sinking fund perhaps. That simply means that if you, the potential bond buyer, have concerns about my ability, the bond issuer, to redeem those bonds as they mature, you may say, as part of our negotiations, Alan, I want you to put a certain amount of money aside every year, put it in the hands of an objective third party, that person who is an escrow agent. They're holding the money. I have to give it up to them. I can't get my hands on it, but they will invest it, they'll grow it, they'll shepherd it, they'll take care of it, and when those bonds mature, they will make sure that it's paid over to you, okay? That's what a sinking fund is. To make you get a warm and fuzzy feeling about my ability to repay those bonds, you want me to put money aside in the hands of an objective third party, okay? Please remember the matching principle in accounting. That simply means that we try to match cash flows to the asset that is producing them, okay? When I buy a machine that will benefit me for 10 years, I don't pay cash for it. I will pay for it with a 10-year bond. I'm sorry, not a bond, a 10-year loan. Usually not a bond, okay? But I don't want to pay for it with cash because that machine will tie up my cash for 10 years. So the matching principle says we try to match the financing mechanism to the life of the asset that is being purchased, okay? You would not take out a 20-year mortgage to pay for a car. You would not take out a 3-year car loan to pay for a home, okay? All right, very good. There's a picture of our next principle on page 107, okay? There are several, many types of bonds, okay? And it's a little easier to see this if I go over to our books, so allow me to do that, okay? Bear with me. Wait for it. There it is. Okay. These are 4 types of bonds that I have chosen, okay? At the very top, I've put them in green, okay? There are secured bonds, and in blue, I have put unsecured bonds, okay? So these 4 will give you an idea of how the bond hierarchy works. So at the very top, the safest of bonds are usually called mortgage bonds. They're also called senior secured debt. That means there's an asset behind it, okay? If I want to issue bonds to construct a factory, I may say as a condition of that borrowing from you that I will put that building in back of it. If I fail to pay you when those bonds mature, you can seize the building, you can foreclose. The debt is secured, the building is collateral, okay? That is very safe, and therefore it's going to have a very low interest rate. You're safer, okay? Remember, the more risk you take, the higher the interest rate is needed to incentivize you. Right under senior secured bonds come junior secured bonds. They're still secured by an asset. There's a tangible asset behind them securing them as collateral. But if you buy one of those bonds, you have to acknowledge that someone is in line ahead of you, the senior secured bondholders. Okay? You're still secured, but there's somebody in line ahead of you. Okay, and of course the interest rate will be a tiny bit higher on that because someone is ahead of you, thereby making your risk a little higher. All right, now we move into the world of debentures. Don't confuse debentures with indentures. Okay, the indenture is the bond contract, the bond agreement. A debenture is basically an unsecured bond. Okay, there's nothing in back of it other than the good faith and credit of the company that's issuing it. Okay, I don't have an asset to put in back of my bond, but I'm good. I've got a wonderful credit rating. You should feel good about it. That's a senior debenture. The interest rate will be higher because, again, there's no asset in back of it, okay? And finally, there are subordinated debentures. In the business, we call them sub-debs. And when you subordinate, that means you are taking a lesser role, okay? A subordinate is someone who works for you, right? So to subordinate means that you are taking a lesser position. So when you buy a subordinated debenture, even though it's unsecured and there is unsecured debt as well as yours, okay, you're acknowledging that someone is ahead of you, okay? A company I work for, I helped them put an issue like this together. It's very interesting. They will have a much higher interest rate. So as you move down this food chain, the interest rate gets higher and higher as you might expect, okay? So please understand what those 4 examples mean and how it impacts the interest rate. Okay? All right, very good. We move on. Okay, let me call back our slideshow here. There we are. When you want to evaluate a bond, when you want to buy a bond, they are rated. You can go to different agencies and see how those bonds stack up with different usually alphabetic ratings. Standard & Poor's and Moody's are the two, I think they're the 2 oldest and most well-known. More recently we have DBRS and Fitch, neither of whom I have used myself. Okay, but bonds that are rated at the very top of the chain as far as security, safety, usually they'll have ratings like AAA or AA. Okay, they're A-rated. Even though Standard & Poor's and Moody's differ a little bit, they do have A ratings. And as you move down the alphanumeric scale to BAA or BBA, BBB, that means that the company issuing the bond or the bond issue itself becomes gradually riskier and riskier and riskier. Okay? So please keep those ratings in mind. I will not expect you to memorize them or know them, but I do want you to know that bonds are rated. The very finest bonds are called investment grade bonds. That means the company I should say, issuing the bonds is very unlikely to default or to violate any covenants. Okay, now please remember, a bond indenture is a contract. If the bond issuer fails to pay principal, pay interest, or violate any of the rules, the many, many rules that they agree to in that bond indenture, that puts them in default. Okay? It's very unlikely that companies like General Electric, PepsiCo, McDonald's, Pfizer, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Johnson & Johnson, it's very unlikely that they will violate any covenants. General Motors, well, General Motors did violate some covenants and they ran into serious problems back in 2008. Okay, so again, how bonds are rated will indicate the level of safety. The safer a bond is, the lower the interest rate is going to pay for reasons we've already explored. Positive and negative covenants, those are rules. In addition to making payments to you, the bond holder, okay, the bond issuer has to make certain promises. A positive covenant means they agree to do something, okay? They may say, we agree that we will maintain, how about a current ratio of 2 to 1, no less, throughout the entire agreement, okay? A negative covenant means something they cannot do. They may they may have to attest to the fact that we will not sell off an operating unit. We will not hire an executive with a salary of more than $500,000. We will not issue a dividend of more than $2 a share. Those are rules. And of course, busting a covenant, as we call it, if you break one of those rules, entitles the holder of the bond to all kinds of legal redress, so you want to make sure you don't bust a covenant. I myself have been employed at different stages of my career to do tests and make sure after financial statements are issued that we have not violated a covenant, and issuing a letter to give everybody assurance that that has not happened. Okay? At the other end of the spectrum from investment grade is the junk bond, okay? Junk bonds, you want to remember a couple of people, Michael Milken and Ivan Boesky. I talked about them in a previous lecture. Junk bonds are very, very, very risky. We call them high yield bonds, but Michael Milken gave them a very sad shadow by abusing them, and they were called junk bonds, okay? They're very risky. Why would you want to have a junk bond? Quite simply because they pay a very, very high rate of interest. So if you have a bond portfolio, a group of bond investments that you own, you might actually want to own one of these things. Proceed with caution. I've never owned a junk bond in my life, and I don't recommend that you do either. But if you do own one, you can rely on them, if they pay their interest, to pay you a very high rate. Okay? All right, this is what a bond listing might look like. Okay, first of all, I pulled this right out of a listing back when I wrote this. This is on page 108. This is a Coca-Cola bond. It might contain a bunch of data that's different from this, but generally speaking, these are the things you look for in a bond listing, ladies and gentlemen, okay? The name of the company, Coca-Cola. Maturity date, this Coke bond matures on September 1st of 2021, okay? The amount, 1324.4. Okay, the amount is in dollars, but it is usually, and it can vary based on who's listing it, it's usually based in millions of dollars. So this Coke bond has $1.324 billion worth outstanding, okay? All right, the price, 106.8. Oh, what about that? Well, that's on page 109. The price of a bond, what happened to $1,000? Well, here's the deal. When you see a bond price, it is stated as a percentage of par, okay? Now, the par is $1,000. So when you see a bond listing that says 106.8, that means 106.8% of its $1,000 par. That means if you want to buy one of these things in today's market, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to cost you not $1,000. It's going to cost you $1,068. Okay? Remember, bonds have a market in which they trade. You might not be able to buy a $1,000 bond at par. You might pay less than $1,000. In the case of Coke, you're going to pay more than $1,000. So please remember, the price of a bond is stated as a percentage of par. 106.8% of 1,000 means $1,068. That's the current market price. This Coca-Cola bond has a 3.3% coupon rate. That means if you own one of these $1,000 bonds, they will send you a check for $33 a year. That's the face rate, that's the coupon rate. Finally, the yield to maturity, the YTM as we call it, that's very, very important. That's one of the single biggest indicators that bond traders use, and it is 2.42%. The significance of that number will wait. I'll get to that with you later on, okay? But that is an important number. Please keep that in mind. I already knew that that number would be less than 3.3%. There's a little trick there, and I'll tell you how that works later. Okay? Remember, bonds usually do not sell for face value. Why? Because they were issued at $1,000, but bonds are a long-term instrument. And that means that as time works its magic, interest rates will fluctuate, sometimes moving up, sometimes down. And as interest rates change, the price of a bond will change too. Okay? All right. Here's my explanation. There's my mention of Coca-Cola. Okay? Now, Coca-Cola's bond, instead of 106.8, it might have easily listed as 98.6. That is not the temperature of a Coca-Cola executive. No. That means that you can buy a Coca-Cola $1,000 bond for 98.6% of its face. That would be $986. Again, sometimes it'll be greater than 100%, sometimes less. That is all we have time for today, so I'm going to post these 2 lectures I've recorded for you today, and I'll be back to you with more on Chapter 5 and a lecture on Chapter 6. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.